was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny S.Tee, and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. Welcome as our second year at Peace with Penny begins. What better way to celebrate Peace with Penny's second year than with the next generation? Unfortunately, we've burdened them with an ugly war with no end in sight. Perhaps their first lesson is life is not fair. Admittedly, we didn't get it right. Can they? We sincerely hope so. These kids have the energy and drive to give it a shot, and guides at Hands of Peace to help them understand the experiences being shared. Today at Peace with Penny, we'll be interviewing Scott Rasmussen, Executive Director of Hands of Peace, where they empower American, Israeli, and Palestinian youth to become agents of change. How do they do this? Each summer, Hands of Peace brings American, Israeli, and Palestinian youth together in Chicago and San Diego for a 3-week experience. In dialogue sessions led by professional facilitators from the Middle East, the teens learn about the other. They share complicated and sometimes painful stories about the conflict and explore peaceful solutions to foster equality, freedom, and justice. The participants stay with host families in the local areas and are provided a homey atmosphere, forming friendships that can last a lifetime. After the summer program, they're encouraged to join the 700 Hands of Peace alumni for additional engaging leadership experiences. Hands of Peace is helping teach these teens how to make a difference. As I said, we'll be speaking with Scott Rasmussen, the Executive Director of Hands of Peace. He's told me that he is honored to be leading the organization as it celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. Before coming to Hands of Peace, Scott served as a U.S. Foreign Service officer from 2009 to 2019. As a diplomat, Scott led people-to-people work, promoting engagement with youth, even through periods of disruptive political change. Scott served at the U.S. Consulate General in Jerusalem from 2017 to 2019, where he managed foreign assistance grants, directed initiatives on Palestinian-Israeli cooperation, and formed public-private partnerships on research and economic development. Beyond his experience in Jerusalem, Scott worked in Washington, D.C., Warsaw, and Asmara. Scott lives with his wife, Brooke, and their 7 children in Spokane, Washington. So welcome, Scott.
Penny, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the
I
introduction.
Oh, thanks for being here. I wanted to get right into it. When and how did Hands of Peace start?
It's a great question. So as you mentioned in the intro, Hands of Peace, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year in 2022. It started with our founder, Gretchen Grad. She was living in the suburbs north of Chicago in the aftermath of 9/11. And she saw what was going on in the United States and in her community in terms of what was happening with Islamophobia and the hatred that those attacks generated or maybe brought to light. So Gretchen wanted to do something about that and felt, I think, in some sense called, and this is something that was very important to her. And so she connected with a friend of hers from a local synagogue and another friend from a local mosque. And they said, what if we bring together Israeli, Palestinian, and American kids in dialogue to experience learning how to see and engage with the other and think about people who are different. And so that started. The first program started in 2003. The organization started in 2002. 2003 was the first summer program, bringing kids from Israel and Palestine to Chicago. And then we've been doing it every summer since. In 2014, we added San Diego as a second site.
Awesome. Well, you've got an incredible background. Can you speak a little bit about that, what you were doing before you came to Hands of Peace and why you made the move?
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I worked for the State Department as a diplomat for 10 years with assignments in Africa, Europe, back in Washington, D.C., and of course, finished my time in Jerusalem. And this is something I'd always, as a kid growing up, was always interested in politics and history and geography and people and how things all connect. I had some experiences when I was in my early 20s that led me to think about things more in an international vein and international focus. And then when I discovered the Foreign Service, I thought, oh, wow, here's a job where you get to serve your country. You get to live overseas. You get to get paid to learn a language and get to represent the United States. And what really interested me was the people-to-people connection. Often when we think of diplomacy, we think of governments talking to governments, but there's an element, I think an important element of people, regular everyday people talking to people from other places. And those are the kinds of connections I wanted to facilitate. And that's what I had the opportunity to do in each of my assignments, but specifically in Jerusalem, where I was working with joint projects between Israelis and Palestinians with organizations like Hands of Peace. In fact, I ran a grant with Hands of Peace in 2018 when I was working there. And in doing this work, and Penny, you know this, and we were talking about this before, you meet the most amazing and incredible people who are part of these organizations and who are doing this work.
Amen. You're absolutely right. Like yourself. I mean,
thank you.
the people that I have met, I really consider them angels on earth. They're fabulous. I mean, to get past, you have to be a special kind of person because you have to be willing to listen to somebody's opinions that often really might be the antithesis of how you believe, but to do this work, that is what this work is.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're fabulous.
The courage to go against the grain in your own society. And so when I decided to leave the government in 2019 to move back to the States to live with my family, I said to my wife, I want to stay connected to this world and to these people. I'm so moved by it. And she said, well, the commute between Spokane and Jerusalem is pretty bare. I don't know how we're going to make that work. But then came COVID, then came 2020, and Hands of Peace was looking for a new executive director. And I was fortunate that they took a chance on me. And so that's how I made the leap and the change from government to nonprofit work and staying involved with a people and a land that I love so dearly.
That's fantastic. So how does interfaith intertwine with your mission?
That's a great question. So I think it goes right back to the founding, as I talked about with Gretchen, and forming the organization and starting the idea and the program with the Jewish and Muslim communities, and Gretchen representing the Christian community in Chicago. The way it plays out now, I think interfaith, it presents an opportunity for the youth to present and come to to the dialogue, to the experience with their whole selves. For many of our youth, not for all of them, but their faith, whether Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or another faith or no faith, is an important part of who they are and their identity. And I think that's something that I think particularly in American society, we don't like to talk about that. We like to kind of push that to the side. But this gives the young people a chance to be their whole selves. And it gives another very real, very upfront experience in how to practice engaging with people who think differently than you do and see the world differently than you do, but realizing, in an interfaith setting that that we have more in common than we have differences. And the way that this plays out, particularly in our summer program, as you mentioned, when we have the youth here in Chicago and San Diego, is we take the delegations to visit services at a church, at a mosque, and at a synagogue. And they have the opportunity to sit through services and then usually to have a meeting with the pastor, the imam, or the rabbi afterward, and members of the community. And some of our youth also have the opportunity to speak before the congregation. So if you can imagine a Palestinian Muslim speaking from a bima, or a Jewish Israeli speaking in front of a group at a mosque, those are powerful experiences, not just for the young people, but for the congregations that they're meeting with. And that, I think, is again, just a powerful signal or symbol of coming together with people who think differently than you, and that believing that it's possible to work together.
That's so fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit more about who the kids are who participate and what the requirements are to attend, and why they say that they want to attend?
Yeah, that's a great question, and questions we are talking about right now. So we're in the middle of recruiting for our program for 2022. So if there are any kids in the Chicago or San Diego areas, we're still looking for participants. You can apply on our website. So broadly speaking, they're 15, 16 years old, usually 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders. And from all of our areas, so the Chicago, San Diego, and then Israel, Palestine, and then we also have a delegation that are Palestinian citizens of Israel. So they are teenagers from all walks of life. We try, particularly from Israel and Palestine, to recruit from across the country and different socioeconomic backgrounds, really bringing in anybody who's interested in the work that we're doing. The requirements to join, one requirement is to have a pretty good level of English, speaking English, because our programs are conducted in English, and a commitment to building peace and justice and working together. And I mean, honestly, when you're 15 or 16 years old, that may look very different when you were older about what that commitment might look like. But I think as you talk with our participants about why they're interested, curiosity, I think, is a big part of it. For the Israelis and Palestinians in particular, and for the Americans, it's the first chance they've had to meet somebody from the other side. And I think for the Palestinians, living under occupation and the interaction they have with Israelis is often, if they interact with an Israeli, is interacting with a soldier. So here's a chance to interact with someone who isn't a soldier. And for an Israeli, oftentimes, the only time they may think about or see a Palestinian is on the news, and when they're talking about a Palestinian terrorist. So here's a chance to sit down with a young man or a young woman who you realize is a teenager like you, who goes to school, has all those same problems, likes the same kinds of music, but as you talked about earlier, Penny, lives a very different life, and realizing just how interconnected their lives are. So I would say what brings them is curiosity. They love the opportunity to travel. They love the opportunity to see the United States. For our American participants, I think it's an opportunity to meet and engage with people from someplace else in the world, and talk about issues of justice and equality. Obviously, we have our own challenges here in the United States, but to talk about those same issues in another context. So,
I would imagine the 3 different groups have different issues in trying to acquire participants. Can you talk a little bit about that? What it's like to,
sure.
An American participant, I would imagine, is a lot easier than perhaps
Yeah.
an Israeli or a Palestinian in particular.
Yeah, you're right. And you know that well from talking with other organizations. So for our Palestinian participants, engaging, and we were just talking about this morning actually in our team meeting, engaging with Israelis can be seen as normalization, which
Correct.
means that by talking with an Israeli, you are normalizing the occupation, you are normalizing the situation. And the pressure is significant for in among Palestinians to not do that and to not participate. So young
It can
people,
be very dangerous, actually.
yeah, it can be dangerous. Yeah. And so we take precautions, for example, with our Palestinian participants, with all of our participants. We don't share their pictures or names in social media without their permission. As we're telling their stories, we want the safety, both I would say physical and emotional, is our first concern when working with our young people. I'm one thing I learned today, I guess, or was reminded of today in talking about normalization. Our Palestinian regional manager, he said when he's talking to people about normalization, he helps them remember that. He said, "What I'm doing is not normalizing. I'm not going there to just make a friend with the Israelis and say, oh, it's okay, this is all normal." He says, "I'm going to share my reality, my experience, and to say that this isn't normal and this isn't the way we have to live, and we can talk to each other about that." For our Israeli participants, as far as the challenges for recruiting, it's as Israeli youth, they have more opportunities for different kinds of activities and other things to draw their attention and time. So this may not be at the forefront of their mind as something that they're interested in, although I think that narrative is changing a little bit. I think as I'm noticing with my own children who are this same age, this new generation is much more attuned to what is going on around them and are much more engaged in, I think, like you talked about in the intro, Penny, fixing the world they've been given, and wanting to understand how they can do that. So that's, but yeah, it is challenging. Recruiting is always difficult because I think there are people who want to engage in peace building work, but like we said before, it may be difficult for them because of the pressures of their society and their families or their friends. And that's something we have to work with, and that we try to support our young people in how do you navigate those conversations when someone accuses you of normalization or accuses you of meeting with a terrorist.
Yes. Yeah. Who financially supports your efforts?
Yeah, so we are 90 to 95% of our funding comes from individual donors. We have a few small family foundation grants or other grants, but mostly it's our donors. We have a large donor base of supporters and volunteers in Chicago and San Diego, but we have supporters across all 50 states and around the world. And we couldn't do it without individuals who believe in their heart that peace is possible and want to contribute and support the next generation in some way.
I know that you've gotten some awards. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in 2021, sorry, the time's all starting to run together. In this last year, we were recognized by the JAMS Foundation, which is the United States' largest organization that works with conflict mediation as an alternative to going through the courts to resolve issues. And each year they recognize an organization or an individual with what they call the Warren Knight Award, which honors people who are, or organizations who are engaged in conflict resolution, mediation, and promoting that. And they recognized Hands of Peace for the work we've done over the years in to promote that kind of resolution to conflict, talking rather than using violence, and supporting that education with our young people. We were really honored to receive that, and it came with a $25,000 grant, which was also greatly appreciated, and we used that grant actually to help fund a program we did for our alumni in the fall of this last year on negotiations training. We partnered with an organization in Israel called the Pathways Institute for Negotiation Education. There it is. And they provided negotiation training for some of our alumni.
That is So cool. Now, the next part I'd like to, we have a little PowerPoint that I'd like to show, and if you could talk about the different slides.
Sure.
And here, the first slide. So can you
Yeah.
talk about
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, our summer program takes place in Chicago and San Diego each summer. We usually 3 weeks in July. This year it's going to be July 6th to the 25th. And so we bring, all told, between the two cities, about 80 to 85 young people together. And in the mornings, they participate in dialogue. And I think maybe we'll talk a little more about dialogue in a minute, about what that entails. But it's a chance for them to learn how to listen and talk with people who think differently than they do. And then in the afternoons, they engage in other leadership development activities, including a ropes course, and also looking at race and justice issues here in the United States. So for example, in San Diego, we take them to visit the border wall with Mexico. For some of the Americans, it's the first time they've seen it. For some of the Israelis and Palestinians, it's the first time to think about walls and division in a different context. I think the most important thing to say about summer program is our host families. So the Israeli and Palestinian participants who come stay with American host families who volunteer to house a teenager or two for 3 weeks. And those relationships, I think, are some of the most enduring and most powerful of the experience, as the participants get to experience life with an average American family, as they've described it to me. And for the host families, they get to meet and experience, young people that they wouldn't have met otherwise, and learn about life in Israel and Palestine in truly powerful ways. And those relationships last for years after the program.
Terrific. And here's dialogue group.
So this is a picture of one of our dialogue groups. In San Diego, we meet at the Pacific Ridge School in Carlsbad. And as you mentioned, they're in small groups. This year we'll have about 12, 13 participants in each group, made up of all the delegations. And these are led by an Israeli and a Palestinian facilitator. And in the dialogue, it really is, like I said, the first chance they have to talk to someone from the other side and to tell their story and their reality and how they see the world. And their experience with the world. And so this is an opportunity both to practice as a young person. How do you tell your story? How do you engage in a setting where there's going to be controversy and disagreement? And conversely, how do you listen in that kind of a setting? One of our participants from this last year, describing dialogue, she said, I learned how to listen to people who think differently than I do and not get stressed out by it. And I thought it's like, wow, if we could all learn that skill, how much better would the world be? So that's, just a little about the dialogue process.
Awesome.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, both in Chicago and San Diego, they participate in a ropes course. I think they first do a lower ropes course and then a higher ropes course, and this is an opportunity to learn to work together. And I think this is something that's very familiar to a lot of people. You've seen team building exercises and working with each other, whether it's a church setting or an office setting. But when I've talked with our alumni, the ropes course comes up almost every single time as just a very powerful physical symbol of how you can work together. When you're trying to climb on something or step over a ledge and you reach out a hand, and it's a hand of your quote unquote enemy, right? And you have that physical experience of working together to solve a common problem or work on a common issue. And I think that there's a lot of lessons that come out of that experience for the young people. And this is the famous peace photo. So every year in both sites, the participants take this photo, and this becomes a physical reminder that they can take home with them of their experience, of the relationships that they made, of the people that they met, and what they learned. And so we have in our office in Chicago a wall that has I think probably all 19 years of summer programs of these photos, and they're really impressive to see. And I will just say, something about the purple shirts. You've seen in some of the photos, and you see here. This is a major part of the program. The color purple representing coming together and peace, and wherever our hands go during the summer program, they're wearing these purple shirts. And when they're at Balboa Park in San Diego, or Millennium Park in Chicago, they draw a lot of attention from people who wonder who are this group of teens wearing purple shirts, and it's a chance to explain a little about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they all talk about the purple shirts and remember them fondly and keep them with them for years.
Terrific. It's my favorite color, so who knew?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, and this is a picture of some of our participants in front of a mural in Chicago. And art plays an important role in our program, and it has in the past, and we anticipate will moving forward. And we have the opportunity for the participants to work with artists in learning, how can you use art to express your feelings or your situation, and how do you use art as a medium to communicate with others. So this mural was not done by our participants, but they do participate in painting murals together. And those are often displayed in the church where we have our program, Glenview Community Church in Chicago, at the School of Pacific Ridge in San Diego. And again, the youth, I've seen many of them have pictures with the mural that they created with their fellow participants, and holding on to that as a memory and a marker of the experience.
That's beautiful. And here.
And then, yeah, so
alumni, huh?
Alumni, it doesn't stop. It's not just the 3-week experience with the summer program. So for our participants, and Penny, you mentioned we have over 700 alumni now who have participated in the program. We continue to provide them opportunities to connect and learn and grow when they return home to Israel, Palestine. And this is a picture of one of those experiences. Traditionally, these after program experiences have been continued dialogue, continued engagement with each other as they are now, back home in their home countries and in their native environments, if you will. And we're also now moving toward providing more opportunities for skill building experiences where they're not just coming together for dialogue, but learning about how they can work together and what are the skills necessary to lead change in their communities.
You want to talk a little bit more about some of the programs that you've had? You've had some just incredible programs for them that, when I was researching you, and I was like, oh, I would have liked to do that, or I would have liked to do that. Your programs are amazing and really provide skills that we all could use.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and I feel the same way. I wish I could participate in the learning. So this shift to more of a skill-based alumni program came out of 2020 when we couldn't have our program. Our board decided to use that as a reimagining year and really to have conversations with our alumni and say, you had this transformative personal experience in the summer program. How can we as an organization continue to support you as you get older and develop and start your studies and your careers? And the two things our alumni told us were, we want to be connected. We want to see that we're part of a larger network of peace builders, and skills. And like you said, Penny, skills that we can use not just in peace building, but in our careers. So things like, continuing to, how do we listen? How do you lead your own difficult conversations? How do you organize for change, bring a group together to lead change? Negotiations was one of the examples. And so over the past year in 2021, we started with a few of these and to start to do some test runs to see what kind of programs worked and what might not work and what might be attractive. In 2021, we did a seminar on resiliency. As we talked about, for the participants after they go home from the summer program, they're in Chicago or San Diego. They have this experience themselves, but then they go home and their families haven't had that same experience, or their friends. So they talk about that being a very stressful re-entry, if you will. And so we provided a session on working with a psychologist who specializes in resiliency. How do you recognize that when you start to feel that physical rise or that physical tension, and how do you work through breathing through that and manage those conversations? So that was just one seminar that I think we will definitely be repeating. We also had, as I mentioned,
I could use that one too.
No, I know. And that's the thing.
Nobody understands, what the heck happened to me. In 2014 when we went on our trip, that I wrote my book about, etc. I was the only one that was apparently permanently impacted by what happened to us, and it changed my whole life, and this is what I do now. But if you were to ask my husband or my son or my friends what happened to her, they just don't understand, and I can't actually explain it to them either. I don't know why. It just is what feels right. It feels what I was chosen to do. So here I am. But I can really relate to what you're telling me about that class for sure.
For sure, yeah. And I think that's important to point out that our American participants, they experience just what you described. They sit in these dialogue sections, they engage with their colleagues from Israel and Palestine, and they're changed. And I had one American alumni say, I went back to my senior year the next year, and everybody was talking about prom or the football game. And she said, that wasn't as important anymore. she said, I wanted to say, hey, there's real problems out there and we can help solve them. And I think, we need it. I think if we as an organization and people who do peace building work are going to bring youth into these situations where in many ways their worldview is shattered, as they understand it, it's incumbent on us to help them put it back together and see how they can then move forward in changing that world to make it a better place. So that's definitely that is the thrust of our alumni programs, is how do you take this experience that starts with dialogue, starts with learning and understanding the other, and empathizing, and then moving forward to change the situation and change reality, to make it more free and just for everyone.
Because your summer program is such core to the beginning of so many wondrous experiences, can you go in a little bit more in depth? You've got 3 weeks where you've taken these kids together, and what's the process like over the 3 weeks? Is there a theme? Do you I would imagine the first week to the second week to the third builds on one another. Can you talk a little bit more in depth about the program?
Sure. So I think that I'll start by saying a little bit more about dialogue, because I realized recently I was talking about dialogue and not everybody understands what that means or what it is or why it's important. So dialogue, there's lots of different methods and ways to do it. But for us, as I mentioned, they're in small groups with an Israeli and Palestinian facilitator. And our director of facilitation is a man named Hussam Gibran, and he has a really special style that really lets the young people drive the conversation. What do they want to talk about? What do they want to understand? So it's a chance to ask questions of your colleagues, people from the quote unquote other side, and to learn about their reality and how they experience the conflict, how they experience the world. And really to humanize the other. Because as I said, I would venture to say, I don't have any specific data on this, but this generation of Israeli and Palestinian youth, I think, are probably more separated than any previous generation, because you had the wall built separating Israelis and Palestinians in the mid-2000s. They just don't have the chance to see. And so it's very easy to dehumanize and stereotype the other side, and so the dialogue gives them a chance to break those stereotypes, break down those metaphorical walls.
I've also
go ahead.
Researched your program and saw that so much of the conflict is a lot of history and a lot of what's happened, but your dealing with live folks who are young and are experiencing them. They're experiencing history live and discussing it with each other. And that just seems so powerful.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think we just had a session with our team where we had our Israeli regional manager and our Palestinian regional manager present the traditional Israeli or Palestinian narrative of the history, right? So they went back to 1918 with the Balfour Declaration and moved forward.
Right.
And they went back to back, and to just understand and see how you can have the same historical event, but two totally different understandings of what really happened or what it meant.
Right.
And for the young people, that's what they get to see and experience, like you said, is that this history is very much with them today, but even your understanding of history may be different, and realize that they're living in important times. So that's dialogue, and they do that every morning for 2.5 hours, and then there's a break for lunch. Also during the week, during the program, they have opportunities to meet in what we call uninational delegations. So, Palestinians just meet with Palestinians, Israelis with Israelis, to talk about, maybe process some of the things they're feeling or experiencing. And then, as I mentioned, they have activities in the afternoons. Some of the highlights that kind of build on, I think I mentioned already, the visits to a synagogue, a mosque, and a church. One of the other programs, I shouldn't say programs, events that it kind of gets built up to is culture night. And so this is an opportunity for the young people they work together in their delegations to prepare 4 or 5 dishes, traditional dishes from their culture, that they then share with each other and with the community. And it's also a chance to then they perform a skit or a sketch demonstrating their reality and their experiences and their culture. This is a powerful moment because it can be in some ways controversial as different groups, portray how they see things in a skit, and that may be not the same as the way the other side interprets it. And so that becomes, as I've understood it, the dialogue up to that point, they're kind of starting to build momentum and connection. And then sometimes, not always, but sometimes that culture night shatters it. And then they pick it up again in dialogue the next day. And that becomes a touchstone of, okay, you saw this, you experienced it. How did that make you feel? How do you want to learn from this? And our director of facilitation says, we have those kinds of events throughout the program, very specifically placed to continue to push and challenge the young people in their thinking and in their engagement. We say that we want them to leave the summer program with more questions than they came with. The idea being, they're not here to solve the conflict. They're not here to create peace all by themselves, but to understand, I think, to build this belief that peace is possible, that I can talk to the other side and we can work together for the future.
Well, the two perspectives, beginning with the beginning of Israel, for instance, as Jews, we look at the beginning of Israel as, yay, we've returned, and we have our homeland, and the Palestinians call it the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. So, you're dealing with such extreme differences in perspective.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that
living it is even more.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was reminded of over the past couple of weeks is, it's a common, I guess, trope to say Americans don't have a real sense of history because we're so young. But these events you're talking about, the foundation of the state of Israel, the Nakba, like, these are not ancient history. We're just 70 years removed. There are many, many people who not only remember but lived through those experiences. And so the history, the past is very much present with us. And I think that's something that I can speak only for myself. I think sometimes I forget in my conversations, or just am not as cognizant of, and how that affects how people feel and see and think and understand the present, because the past is so much still with them.
Yeah. Well, for instance, unfortunately, we're getting to the ages where a lot of the Holocaust survivors who went to Israel are passing away now, but these are the grandparents, of these kids, and they know them, and they know
Yeah,
their stories and so on. So
yeah.
they live it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Um, I had an Israeli colleague remind me recently. She said, "You have to remember when you talk about the Holocaust and you hear things like today, Iran, saying that we want to destroy Israel." She said there are people who know what that feels like. They remember when there was another country that wanted to destroy Jews, and eliminate them. So it's not a theory. It's something that's very real for people who are still alive, or like you said, their immediate descendants. So there's, I think, real fear and concern, that like I said,
And
I
with
just don't know that we always recognize.
the growth of
Yeah.
anti-Semitism now, it's in the
Mhm.
papers every day, and the commentary and the different comments as if the Holocaust didn't exist, etc.
Mhm.
We're unfortunately once again reliving a lot of what happened, and it's scary. It's a weird, scary time right now.
Yeah. And that's why like you talked about and you alluded to, that's why I think working with young people is so important, because they have that past, but and they understand it, but they're not set in that has to be the future, and that they're set, in fact, very much that the world they've inherited is not the one they want to live in, and they want to be able to work together to make it better.
One thing we haven't really touched on about different programs you offer is your tours. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So, I mean, I think you can. This is kind of your story, Penny, right? The opportunity to go to Israel for yourself and discover what life there is like versus what we often see portrayed in American media. So, I may get the dates wrong, but I think it was around 2011, 2012. Some of our Hands of Peace supporters, they had been hosting Israeli and Palestinian kids in the States, and they said, "Hey, we'd like to go there and see it for ourselves." So we partnered with an organization called Mejdie Tours, which is founded by a Palestinian American named Aziz Abu Sara. And so every year since then, 2011, we have taken a group of adults, 40 or 30 to 40 people, on a multi-narrative tour of Israel-Palestine. So in this tour, we have the opportunity. Obviously, you're going to the region, you need to see the historical and religious significant sites, but also a chance to meet with Israelis and Palestinians, who are working on the conflict in various ways, or around the conflict, and to get to understand, to see what life is like for them, and understand their stories and narratives. And sometimes it's tempting to call it a dual narrative tour, because you think it's the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative, but the truth is, there's many narratives, and that's what we call it, a multi-narrative tour of you. I think you get a real feel for just how complex it truly is, and the reality of lives the reality that affects people's lives, and how it's their lives. I mean, like you talked about in your intro, when you heard the sirens, you said the Israelis heard it first because they're used to it, right?
Right.
Or for a Palestinian at a checkpoint, that's something that just doesn't compute for an American mind.
Right.
But to see it, or to experience it yourself, gives you a different view on what life is like, and why things are so complex, and why this work is so important. So we obviously haven't done those tours in 2020 or 2021, but our next one is in September of 2022 this year, and we're happy to welcome anybody who wants to join us on that tour.
Well, even I remember one of the things that really got to me when we were in bomb shelters. This happened in 2014,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, I took my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. Thinking we're going to Israel to want him to identify with Israel and make it part of his heart. We took him to Israel as his bar mitzvah present, but that was Operation Protective Edge. And literally on 4th of July, as we were on the plane going there, the bombs started, and we would see all the tour the places that we had intended to. There was just one that we weren't able to because it was the Air Force Museum and they're all planes outside, and they didn't know if the missiles were coming where we would hide, so they took that off the list. But things like you feel the percussion of the Palestinian missiles blowing up. What it was actually Iron Dome, Israel's defense system, blows up the Palestinian missiles in the sky so they can't land. But you can feel it. You feel it on your skin, the explosions in the air, and then you're supposed to wait 10 minutes until the shrapnel falls to the ground. But Israelis, this is happening unfortunately too often. So, a businessman, they tell you wait 10 minutes, but he walked out. I said, why? Where's he going? And they said, well, not everyone waits. It's like, how does this become mundane and whatever? But
normal, I had an experience when I worked for the Consulate General in Jerusalem. In 1 week, we had a meeting with a gentleman who does peace building work, and he lives in Sderot, which is right on the border with Gaza. And he was coming to Jerusalem to meet with us, and he was late, and he arrived late, and it was fine. But he came in and he apologized and said, "I'm sorry I was late. I had some trouble at home this morning." And it didn't click until we were further into the conversation when he said he's from Sderot. And we said, wait, you were late because there was a rocket launch that morning and he couldn't leave his home. So that was, and for him, it was just normal, right? He just said, this is normal. And I contrasted that with later that week, I was meeting with a Palestinian contact who we had worked to get him a permit to be able to come from the West Bank into Jerusalem. And at our meeting, he said, we were talking about a grant that we were working on. He said, do you mind if we finish a little early? I would like to go pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is my first time I've had that opportunity in over 20 years, since before the wall had been built. And those two conversations, like these two men who just like, this was their life, this was normal to them, but it's not normal, right? And that's the reality of needing to come together and understand that. That here's this man, he's been kept from praying at one of the holiest sites in his religion, and he lives just literally minutes from it. And then this other man living on a border with people launching rockets. So it was a stark reminder, kind of just how people have settled into what is normal. But I think you're finding, particularly with young people, that they're saying this isn't normal. It doesn't have to be like this. And how can we make it different?
Yeah, because of COVID this past year and the violence in May, your program was run differently. And I believe the participants will be catching up with one another this summer in person. Can you talk about how you ran the program this past year?
Sure. So in 2021, with the inability to travel still, we wanted to still hold a program. So we held what we called the Summer Program Launchpad. So we had participants who had been recruited to come to the United States. Obviously, we weren't able to bring them. So what we did is we said, okay, let's have you meet by delegation on Zoom. And so the Palestinians met with the Palestinians, the Israelis with Israelis, Americans with Americans, and they met for a series of conversations over the month of July last year. And the idea was to expose them to the process of dialogue and understanding what dialogue is, how it's a tool, and what are the skills that go into it. How do you tell your own story? How do you listen constructively in a difficult conversation? And it was tremendous. And in fact, we're going to figure out some way to do some portion of that again in the future. Because now these kids will come this summer. They're going to come now to Chicago and San Diego this July. And they have a little bit of understanding of what they're getting into and what dialogue is and how it can be a tool. And one of the things that both our Israeli and Palestinian regional managers said is they said, by having this uninational conversation, they were able to talk about things, problems within their own societies that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to talk about, because once they get together with the other side, it becomes all about the conflict. So, for example, the Palestinians talked about inequities in Palestine and the suppression of women's rights in Palestine, and what could they do as a group to maybe work on that. So it was an unintentional, we thought it would be beneficial. It ended up being more beneficial than we anticipated. And I think will be an important part of our program going forward, giving them a chance to learn and understand about what they're doing before the intensive experience of meeting with the other side.
Cool. Now, I know as a mom, I was surprised not at what I was able to teach my son, but what he taught me, especially about myself. What do you think you've learned from working with these students, especially anything that may have surprised you?
Wow, that's a good question. I had lots of things that surprised me. Well, it's hard, right? Because I think it's easy to say, the first thing that came to mind was the resiliency of youth. But I'm hesitant to say that as we learn more about how young people process trauma and process experiences. I think as we're going through COVID right now, we're saying youth are so resilient, they're wearing their masks, they're going to school, but I don't think we know necessarily what the long-term effects will be. But I think related to that resilience is this curiosity that somehow, I think as you get older in life, gets, I don't know, smashed out of you as you face reality. But that's what it's the curiosity and how that manifests, I think, in the dialogue or in the conversations, in the willingness to ask tough questions. And questions that I think as adults, maybe we wouldn't ask because it would be considered rude or inappropriate. But for kids, they're like, no, I don't understand this. Why is this like that? Why do you do things that way? And it's a sincere question. It's not an accusation, but it's a genuine desire to understand and learn. So I would say curiosity, and I would say the other characteristic, the other thing that really impresses me is their ability to listen and to empathize. And again, I feel like that's maybe something younger people we do, and then naturally over time as we grow as adults, we lose that willingness to listen. And I think by providing them this space to practice those skills, to practice asking questions, to practice listening, you're normalizing those as important skills, right? Like you said, like these are things I wish I could learn myself, or these are all skills we could learn ourselves. And I think for young people to really ingrain those in a transformative experience with different people, I think prepares them to be better leaders and not just, and this is what we talk about with our alumni, it's not just that you'll all be peace builders, but whatever field you go into, or as parents, or as community members, these are skills that will make you a better person overall.
Well, interesting you would mention that now, because I was just going to I'd like to play a clip about one of your Israeli alumni, Stav Arnon, who went on with two friends to create a Facebook event calling on women to protest domestic violence. Would you like to introduce it?
Sure. So Stav participated in the program, I think about 10 years ago, and she is a dynamic individual. You'll see her explain her story about how she took the skills and experiences she learned with Hands of Peace to address a really important problem in Israel.
Hi, I'm Stav. I'm a Hands of Peace alumna from 2004. On 2018, 26 women were murdered here in Israel by domestic violence. I called my two friends, Dror Sadot and Ruti Klein, and together we initiated the first and the largest women's strike here in Israel. I'm a woman, I strike. Here on Rabin Square, in the main rally, we had more than 30,000 women protesting. During 2020, the COVID year, domestic violence increased all over the world. And we had to take an action once again. So we initiated the first Women's March here in Tel Aviv with 12,000 women and men protesting against domestic violence. As well, we initiated a project of spreading cards with hotline numbers and emergency numbers for women suffering from violence in their homes. And we cooperated with Domino's Pizza and other food delivery chains, and we spread all the cards to many houses around the country. I used to think of myself as very politically aware, And in that matter, Hands of Peace really shook my ground. For the first time in my life, I met Palestinian kids that were my age, but living behind a fence, have to spend hours on checkpoints, can't see their family members and other parts of the country. My mind was blown away. And I think that the main thing I took from Hands of Peace, there is no way to avoid and to run away from conflicts, but on the contrary, to treat the wound with gently and patient, and to acknowledge all the past pains, and together to build the bridges.
Wow.
Yeah, she is remarkable, and I didn't be clear. Whenever you talk to Stav, that's the Stav you get. This isn't just Stav for the camera. She is energetic, she's passionate, and really believes in what she's doing. And I think what she said right there at the end also, Penny, goes back to the last question you asked about what do I take away. You know, that she says you can't run away from the conflict. You can't just go on as if, you know, it doesn't affect me or I can't do anything about it. And I think that's what I see our alumni doing, is saying, I can do something even in my corner of the world about this. And I think Stav, that's a perfect example of, you know, making the world a better place. And this is something we talk about with our alumni, as I mentioned, that it's not just, you know, that everybody who participates in our program will go into diplomacy or politics. But we talk about the concept of positive peace, that peace isn't just the absence of violence. It's not going to be just, you know, rockets stop and the end of the occupation, but it's going to be building a society and a culture and country where there are free and equal rights for everyone, opportunities for everyone. And there's lots of ways to do that work.
Because Israelis and Palestinians don't speak the same language, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our programs are conducted, both the summer program and our alumni programs are conducted in English. But we don't want that to inhibit anybody in their ability to participate. So in the dialogue sessions, for example, if a participant wants to express something in Arabic or in Hebrew, the facilitators will allow them to do that. The facilitator will translate and then make sure that they give the young person a chance to maybe correct or, you know, redirect what the facilitator said. As someone who speaks multiple languages myself and has been in situations where you're in a really important engagement and you want to communicate, you know, sometimes in a language that isn't your own or your first language, you don't have the words, and you want to be sure that you're able to get what you're feeling across. And so we provide that opportunity for the young people.
How'd you end up choosing Chicago and San Diego?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Gretchen was living in Chicago in 2002, 2003 when she started the program, Gretchen grad, in Glenview. And then that started that. And then in 2013, 14, a member of our staff, Scott Silk, who'd been working with Hands of Peace in Chicago, he moved to San Diego to take a job there, working for a school, Pacific Ridge School. And he got together with Gretchen and said, hey, I would love to keep doing this. Can we start it here? So since 2014, we've had both sites going. The programs run concurrently for 3 weeks in July. Yeah, and it's a chance for as we say to the Israeli Palestinian participants, it's a great chance to see two great American cities and experience the differences in those communities and not just in terms of climate and architecture, but also, you know, the people who live in both of those cities.
I understand during the summer program that you have guest speakers, and I was curious, what kind of guest speakers have you had?
Sure, we have guest speakers who can talk to the youth about different elements of kind of what they're experiencing. For example, in San Diego, we have often had a guest speaker from the Tariq Hamisa Foundation, which was a foundation started after a young Arab man was killed delivering pizzas. And his father ended up connecting with one of the murderers and helping get him out of prison early. And then they worked together to found this foundation that works with young people on reconciliation. and working with those who have hurt you or wronged you. And so he comes and he tells his story about what happened to his son and how he decided to move forward. And that's a very, from what I understand, a very powerful experience for the young people to see something so, I think for many of them relatable, right? For many Palestinians, they've had family members who have been killed in the conflict, or for Israelis as well. And to understand that the reconciliation and working together with your enemy is possible. And so different speakers like that who can talk to experiences that they may be experiencing, but in a different context.
We haven't spoken a lot about the whole host family interactions and so on. I'm curious about that. That just seems like such an incredible opportunity for both sides. And how do you come up with these host families, and who participates, and what have been the reactions from them?
Yeah. So for our host families, we recruit them from the communities immediately around where we hold a program. So in San Diego, that's North County. In Chicago, that's the North Shore. We're always welcome to people who are maybe outside that immediate footprint. The one catch being you need to be willing to drive your participant to the program every morning. So that sometimes limits how far out we can go. But we work with American participants. Often they become host families. We work with community groups, religious organizations to advertise this opportunity, and we have them apply on our website. And right now, we're accepting applications in both Chicago and San Diego for host families. We'd love to have people sign up on our website. So there's an application process, and then we have an interview with them. We do conduct a background check on all the adults living in the family, in the home, excuse me. And then assign an Israeli or Palestinian, and sometimes even Americans to stay with the host families. And I think, as I said, this is one of my favorite things, is to talk with our host families or our alumni about that experience. So during the summer program, we have 2 or 3 days built in that are called host family days. And that's where we don't have any program planned. They have the opportunity to spend with their host family, and the host family gets to show off, what they enjoy about their city or what they do as a family. And the participants just speak glowingly about those experiences to get to experience life with the host family. Another piece about the host family that I didn't anticipate until I started was the connection between the host family parents and the participants' parents in Israel and Palestine.
Oh.
And I think about the parents from Israel and Palestine, like, talk about courage. You're sending your 15 or 16-year-old across the world to meet with the other side, to stay with people you've never met. And my understanding is a lot of the parents of participants will connect with and talk daily or every other day with their host family parents to check in and make sure that their child is being taken care of in a way that's important to them. And those are relationships also that form beyond the kids and the host families, but their parents also forming relationships. And I've heard of many stories of when people travel to Israel, Palestine, they stay at the home of the young person they participated with or hosted, and have those opportunities to connect. So it does reach beyond just the youth themselves, but to their families and their communities. And that's for me personally, as I said, as a former diplomat who was really interested in connecting Americans with, average everyday Americans with average everyday people from other countries. This is really near and dear to my heart as something that I think is critical to building understanding and bridges and a better world.
How great. For our final question, we've seen that you've adjusted your programming as the participants have grown in their development or responded to facts on the ground through the years. In 5 years, what types of programs would you want Hands of Peace to be able to offer?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and one that we have been asking, not just us at Hands of Peace, but I think everyone in the peace building world. We've been around for 20 years. There are some organizations who have been around just a few years longer. Others have started since we started. There's hundreds, literally, of organizations who are working on this issue in Israel, Palestine. And the question is, what have we done, and how do we need to change moving forward to have a real impact, a real change? And I think particularly this question really came to the forefront after what happened last May, when it wasn't just Hamas launching rockets or Israel suppressing Palestinians in Jerusalem or the West Bank, but it was the division within Israel between Palestinian citizens of Israel and Israelis and the mob violence. So a lot of people said, what are we doing, these organizations? So as we've thought about these questions, there's kind of two things that come to mind for me, what kinds of programs I would like to be able to offer. And one is something similar to what we offered this year, is in terms of a broader experience for Israelis and Palestinian youth who may not come to participate in our summer program. Maybe they don't want to come engage in peace building, but to do a program to give them the opportunity to learn about dialogue and to learn about what a tool and skill that can be. And then from that pool, we would recruit people to participate in our summer program. And on the other end of it, to have programs, and this is something we've already started, where we are connecting our alumni with alumni from other organizations. This is I think has been a shortcoming of the peace building field, is there's been a lot of competition and people haven't wanted to kind of share their alumni or share or connect. But if there's going to be a tipping point in Israel-Palestine, I think it's going to take a critical mass of people who believe peace is possible, who have engaged with the other, and are willing to work together. And I think personally there is that critical mass. I just don't think they know about each other or they're connected. And so we want to do more programs to not only strengthen the ties between our alumni, but to strengthen their ties with others who are doing this work and help them see they're not alone, and that there actually is thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who want to work together and end the conflict.
That's interesting because I know certainly one of the organizations that I work with, and I know you're a member of, is ALMEP.
Mm-hmm.
And I've interviewed many from there, many from other places as well, but also Avi Meyerstein, the head of their organization, and Huda Burkub, their local director. But many, organizations like yourself, and it's interesting how I could see the need for each of the organizations to be aware of one another, because this work is difficult, and having some additional support and somebody who can, commiserate with you, given the very strange situations at times that occur in Israel and Palestine and so many different factions, etc. A sensitive ear to commiserate seems like a really good idea.
Yes, yeah, organizationally and individually, absolutely. And I think ALMEP has done a tremendous job over the past 3 or 4 years of really fostering that and really bringing the community together. And it's interesting because within the peace building community, it's not as if everybody has the same views or same ideas about how to do the work or what the end how we get there, but we all do have the same vision of the end result, which is a free and just reality for everyone. And we have a chance to practice what we're preaching a little bit as organizations. How do you work together with people who think or see things differently than you, and to move toward a common goal? So yeah, I'm really it's an honor for Hands of Peace to be a part of the community, to be a member of ALMEP. And we look forward to continuing those ties and connections and having opportunities with people like you, Penny, to tell our story and let people know that there is important work being done, and there are people who are talking to each other and who are interested in peace, and it's not all terrible all the time.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Scott. That was so inspiring. And the fact that you bring these players together and they learn conflict resolution and leadership skills. This is working on peace and definitely making the world a better place. And I thank you for that. Next week on Tuesday, February 8th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to be speaking with both Jane Krivine founder and executive director, and Lee Wilson, managing director of Tennis for All. Jane is the daughter of Freddie Krivine, who was known as Israel's Mr. Tennis. He was one of the 6 founder trustees of the Israel Tennis Centers. One of his passions was to support tennis in the Arab sector by introducing tennis programs into the community. The Freddie Krivine initiative strives to capture the imaginations of kids of all backgrounds and skill levels, bringing together a coexistence community of Arab and Jewish kids playing tennis together with the support from Arab and Jewish parents, coaches, players, teachers, and volunteers. We hope you can join us to listen how another, perhaps unexpected avenue is used to work on peace between Israeli and Arab youth. And for now, may you live in peace, shalom, and salam.